All right, so obviously we're in getting into the Stanley Cup final, and it feels like it's kind of flown by. There's been some great moments in playoffs, some not so great moments in playoffs. I think for the most part, even though there was a sweep, I would say the third round felt a little more interesting than the second round. I don't know about you. Do you agree there?
Yeah, to me, I don't know what it is. I always find the second round of the playoffs to be the least interesting. This year, we only had really what was it, one close series. It was the even and it, yeah, it was just Dallas Seattle. I think right. Every other series felt like it was never
Well, like
really close.
Toronto and Florida was a bunch of one goal games, but it was a five-game series.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's weird. So you look at it, and Dallas put up a fight here, but they just kind of fell completely flat in that final game. So there was, there was some duds. What didn't have any duds in it? The World Hockey Championship. Just want to throw that out. But unfortunately, also all the picks we gave didn't end up working well because Switzerland last week was looking perfect, and then they completely blew it to Germany. But yeah, so today we're going to talk about players that earned fantasy value boosts because of the 2023 playoffs, and we'll go back kind of to the usual format of shallow, medium, and deep. And I guess we could start with the shallow, which includes a very good goalie that's kind of dominating right now, an Oakville, Ontario native. That's the only reason this guy's known, and a guy going to the Stanley Cup final for the first time. So let's hear your picks.
Yes, and I know I'm kind of contradicting my tip from last week when I was talking about being careful about recency bias, but that doesn't mean that there are certain situations in which playoff performance can tell you something about the fantasy season. So that's why I wanted to do this segment and let you know which types of players and situations actually are relevant for next year. So shallow leagues, we'll start, of course, with Sergei Bobrovsky. And as I hinted at last week, he's been so dominant in the playoffs that it actually is relevant for fantasy next season, because you have to look at where was he at the start of the playoffs, right? He wasn't even starting. It was Alex Lyon. The third stringer was in, and that did not bode well for Bobrovsky's fantasy value going into next season. If you ask someone April 17th, what's Bobrovsky going to be worth in fantasy next season? You'd say, I don't know. He's even a starter anymore. You still have Spencer Knight possibly coming back. But now Bobrovsky has been so good that he's earned himself, no matter what happens in the Stanley Cup final, barring an injury that carries into next season, he's the number one going to next year. And that means his fantasy value has taken a massive leap going forward. So that's one. Number two, Evan Bouchard, defenseman, the Edmonton Oilers. Down the stretch after Tyson Barrie got traded to Nashville, Bouchard was already hot in fantasy leagues. He was a point per game player. He took it to another level in the playoffs, 17 points in 12 games. And out of every defenseman this century who's played at least 10 games in a postseason, that's the second highest points per game of anyone. Cale Makar last year in his Conn Smythe trophy-winning season being number one. That's how good Bouchard was in just 2 rounds. And I think it's pretty clear he's established as the power play quarterback now. PP1 on the best power play literally of all time, Edmonton this season. So the ceiling for Bouchard next year is massive. Like, what is it? 80 points? 85 points? I think the range of outcomes has really grown in terms of what the potential is now. So that's a major change in fantasy value for Evan Bouchard. One more for shallow leagues. This is a weird one because Jack Eichel, it's not like his value per se is changing. We know what he is. He's give or take a point per game player. But I think what we've seen from him in these playoffs is just really showing that he's healthy. And with every month and year that he gets further removed from his neck surgery, his disc replacement, I think you can trust him a little more. He's still in his prime. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw the best version of Jack Eichel next year. So those are my shallow league risers.
You look at Eichel. It was funny seeing a tweet from Sportsnet yesterday saying that Eichel has made it to the Stanley Cup final every time he's made the playoffs. That's kind of funny. So does that mean Jeff Skinner is going to help Buffalo make the Cup final next year? Put some money down on it, which would be kind of ironic because that's where Eichel started. All right, the medium league. There's a few more options here, and this one's I think an interesting one, especially when it comes near the end of this. But there is a goalie here that is surprising to see. But let's hear your medium pickups here.
Yeah, I have a few guys on this list that are UFAs, and that's why I think there's an actionable item for fantasy, because it's players who have changed their value and then might find themselves in better situations on their next contract. So one being Ivan Barbashev of the Vegas Golden Knights. He's been very effective as a first-line player for Vegas in these playoffs, usually playing with Eichel and Jonathan Marchessault. And to me, he's shown that he can be a frontline player still. He's a year removed from a 26-goal season, 60-point season with St. Louis. And I think now based on how effective he's been in a scoring line role. Whether it's Vegas re-signing him and keeping him on that line or another team, I think it's clear that Ivan Barbashev will get another chance in a top 6 role. I don't think that was necessarily the case even 3 months ago. So he's upped his value a lot, and I think he's maintained the idea now that he's going to be a relevant player in fantasy. So that's one. Another one being Tyler Bertuzzi of the Boston Bruins. He was dominant, 10 points in 7 playoff games, and he was someone who was sort of an afterthought brought in at the trade deadline, and it was looking like he was going to maybe be a third line type of player. And his effectiveness had been limited the last couple seasons by injuries. But then he gets a chance. Taylor Hall's out. He gets put onto a scoring line. He immediately is very effective for Boston. And then the playoffs, he goes gangbusters. So again, similar to Barbashev, we're seeing a situation with Bertuzzi where he's earned himself a bigger role wherever he goes. So that could be a second line job on maybe a middling team. So his range of outcomes now is a player next year, which is important for fantasy as well. One more, or two more actually. This one is interesting in Seattle because if you look at the way the season played out, Martin Jones was the guy in Seattle's net. But in the playoffs, of course, Philip Grubauer has taken over. It was his net. Martin Jones is a UFA. Grubauer signed for 4 more seasons. And suddenly Seattle is a good team. It's not necessarily a bad fantasy environment anymore. And Grubauer has sort of taken over and locked in that job as the starter, or at least the 1A going into next season. So year over year, big jump in fantasy value there, depending on what Seattle does in terms of bringing in another goalie. And the last one, of course, Adin Hill, who's even creeping up the Conn Smythe rankings. If you look on Daily Faceoff right now, I have my latest edition. Adin Hill jumps all the way to 3rd on the list. He's been unbelievable in the playoffs, .937 save percentage, and he's absolutely earned himself a long look in a significant role next season, whether it's with Vegas or a team that has less competition. Adin Hill is going to be fantasy relevant next season.
You know, the thing about Adin Hill, it wasn't like he kind of just showed up now. And obviously, he wasn't super high on the depth chart at points this year, you know, in injuries to have just ravaged Vegas's goaltending situation, which is kind of funny because the last time that happened, they also made the Stanley Cup final. But when it comes to for Adin Hill, like this is a guy that, you know, when he got acquired, it's like maybe he's the starting goalie. At this time, we weren't too sure about Logan Thompson and things like that. But with Hill, you know, Arizona Coyotes fans were saying for a while, like this guy is a future number 1 goalie. This guy's got a lot of value. He's going to be a good goalie. And, you know, with the state of the Coyotes, it was tough for him to really get consistent work. And Darcy Kemper came in, things like that. And then he goes to San Jose and just it didn't seem to matter what he did because it was the San Jose Sharks last year. It wasn't great. So Vegas was his first real chance of playing a competitive team. And he's been able to save this group where, you know, the big question of like, if Logan Thompson came back, would he be the guy that they'd go to? And it's like, no, you can't. Adin Hill's just playing that good right now. So it's been really cool to see Hill kind of just answered the way he's been. And you know, I guess the one thing about the Conn Smythe thing is like super deserving, but doesn't matter that he hasn't played the whole playoffs.
Yeah, that's what holds him back for sure. On a per game basis, he's actually been better than Bobrovsky in terms of goals saved above average per 60 minutes, but the sample size puts him lower in those rankings. What's going to be interesting for Hill next year is, do you want to resign in Vegas? Because what about Robin Lehner? Is he coming back? Is his career in jeopardy? Or is he going to be back in the net? And of course, you have Logan Thompson. So it's a very messy situation there. And if I'm Adin Hill, I think I probably want to explore my options and see if there's a situation where I can be the unquestioned starter on a team.
It's kind of crazy when you think like, you know, goaltending in the playoffs matters a lot, but then you'll get like the odd year of like Michael Leighton and Antoniemi being the goalies. But, you know, looking before this year or before the playoffs, like were either of these two goalies even close to like the top 25, top 30 best goalies in the league? And they've been 2 of the best players, period, in the playoffs. It's just crazy how that can happen. But, you know, it's kind of the beauty of that position. Again, you don't want to bet all your money on like the thing is, even if Bobrovsky wins the Stanley Cup, you know, there'll still be people saying, is he still worth the money? It's like, well, if you win the Stanley Cup, yes, 100%. It doesn't really matter. You paid the money to get that cup. You wanted that. But like, what if he's just like completely irrelevant the rest of his career? We just don't know. So.
He might be. He could easily be terrible. Like he's probably going to be someone who will be overdrafted, and I'll probably be putting him on a bust list like next September. I'm sure I will be.
I don't want this to be like the Carey Price where this is his like last bit of good hockey and then he's not around again. So I'm, you know, for Bobrovsky, I'm loving watching this. Adin Hill, a great answer. I think this is gonna be a great goaltending battle. That's the thing I'll be watching. And I guess we'll wrap up this segment by talking about some deep league guys, including one guy who was a pretty dang good goal scorer for a couple of years, and another who just kind of got his first taste of NHL hockey.
For sure, yeah. A few quick hits here. So one being Anthony Duclair of the Florida Panthers. So what matters to me, similar to with Eichel, but in Duclair's case, the major injury was this season. So coming back from that Achilles that he injured while training last summer, and it took a while maybe for him to be fully himself. But I thought, especially getting to see him because obviously he was here for the Leaf series, seeing him up close, he just looked really fast. It looks like he has his legs back, has his speed back, and I think he's gotten more effective as the playoffs have gone. He's looked good on the line with Barkov and Carter Verhaeghe. Uh, and I think he's going to be back to 25, maybe 30 goal scorer next season. I don't know for sure if it's going to be with Florida. You never know. They could trade him. But either way, I think he's going to be someone that gets drafted and you can count on next year. So that's one. Another being Thomas Harley of the Dallas Stars. So he's someone that, of course, has legitimate prospect pedigree. He's a first-round pick, somewhat late bloomer. He's 21 years old, had a really good year in the AHL, and in the playoffs was about half point per game and looked really solid. The role wasn't huge, but I think he really looked like he belonged. And there's room to climb that depth chart, I think, in Dallas, especially the deeper part of their blue line is getting old, especially with Ryan Suter there. So I think that Harley's role is going to grow next year, and he's going to be a legitimate sleeper in fantasy. Another one, of course, Matthew Nyes with the Toronto Maple Leafs. So the fact that he could jump in and start on the third line, and within a game or two, he's already jumping right up to the first line. That's how highly the team thinks of him. He really did look like he belonged. He was just really strong on pucks. He was creative. And I think because of his two-way ability that he showed, he's going to get the trust of his coach, whether it's Sheldon Keefe or someone else. And I think we're looking at Matthew Nyes in a top six role next season, probably playing with some really good players. And part of that is because the Leafs, we know they're going to lose some bodies as they're trying to figure out their cap situation. I don't think we're going to see Michael Bunting, for example, coming back. Maybe not Alex Kerfoot either. Maybe he'll get moved. Or no, Kerfoot's a UFA. Is he UFA? Yeah, he is. But I don't think we're seeing Kerfoot come back. And as a result, there's going to be big vacancies on the left side, and Nyes has a chance to climb. Who knows? He could be a first line left winger at the start of next season. One more for you, Steven. It's Akira Schmidt, the New Jersey Devils, and it's crazy. To start the season, he was the Devils' third stringer, and now coming out of the playoffs, is he the number one? Is he the starter? I think at the very least, he's leapfrogged Mackenzie Blackwood. He stole the job from Vitek Vanacek during the playoffs. And I think we're looking at least a tandem of those two, with Blackwood being pushed out by next season. So with the Devils really on the rise, I think Schmidt's going to be someone to watch closely in drafts for fantasy next year.
To add to that, I still think the Devils have to explore some potential trades or even the free agent market to find out some better goaltending there. Because the fact that they couldn't seem to pinpoint, like you look at Schmid, and he should not have been the number one in the playoffs. And then he had his bad moments, and Vanacek came in. It's like, I think you got to be able to shore that up, because I said it early on when the Devils were looking as good as they were at the start of the year, that Vanacek, while he was saving a few games, his underlying numbers were actually a little concerning, to the point where this was not sustainable and probably was not going to be the savior they needed in the playoffs. And played his first couple games, clearly didn't work out. So we'll see there. But for the Devils, I gotta think they're still going to look at the goalie market. But if Schmid's to get the answer, that's one heck of an answer that they got later in the draft a couple years ago.